Hey guys, it's Tuesday the 31st, Halloween. I'm going to be taking my kids out tonight and letting them go and collect candy that they're not going to be able to keep because it's cheaper for me to give them a little bit of an allowance than to let them eat that candy and then pay for the the dentistry that's going to ensue afterwards, not to mention all the other issues that is caused by candy. It makes me wonder why I even engage it. I guess it's part of being a kid, and I enjoyed it as I was a kid when I was growing up. So why not let my kids enjoy it, even though I know that the candy is probably not really good for them. Anyhow, that's only partially what I'm thinking about today. I wanted to share some of my thoughts around Bitcoin. And it's a conversation that's happening more and more. There's TED Talks about it. There's all sorts of articles being written about it. The Bank of England is worried about it. I'm sure all of the major central banks are worried about Bitcoin. And so you might be wondering why on a permaculture channel I'm talking about cryptocurrency or an alternative currency that may or may not become the future of money, as well as all sorts of other things that Bitcoin can actually do. Bitcoin's a really interesting and Bitcoin and all the other cryptocurrencies, for that matter, are kind of interesting because they're trying to solve multiple problems within the whole monetary, not just within the monetary system, but outside of the monetary system as well. So, if you've not looked into Bitcoin, I encourage you to do it. I'm not going to go into a lot of depth here because number one, I'm not an expert in it. I only know a few things, and number two, you could literally spend weeks trying to learn how this whole new financial ecosystem actually functions. But one of the interesting things about these cryptocurrencies is that they'll actually disrupt the way that we trust. In that right now, when we buy a house, we have an intermediary or several intermediaries, a mortgage provider or broker, the bank, potentially, and lawyers, and all of these things and people and professions help us to make sure that we actually get the house and that it is transferred properly into our names and that the money that we spend is actually going to yield a home that we have title for and all of these other things. And so professions, if you will, like engineers, architects, lawyers, doctors, all are forms of trust mechanisms or trust professions, essentially. And while Bitcoin isn't necessarily going to disrupt all of those different professions, it's definitely going to disrupt quite a few of them in the way that it works. And so we find ourselves in this really interesting space. And the reason I've been thinking about it is because, I grew up right in the middle of the dot-com era. I was in university and watching that whole thing unfold, this huge bubble, as people tried to figure out how to embrace the internet and use it within their businesses and create value engines and new types of shopping carts and technologies and services. And in some ways, we're still in that dot-com bubble, although it's morphed and evolved. And right now, this Bitcoin thing feels very similar to what it felt like when we were right at the very beginning stages of that dot-com bubble in the early 2000s. And one of the things that you can say is probably going to be true with regards to this whole Bitcoin phenomena, or cryptocurrency is what I should call it, so it's not just talking about one of the cryptocurrencies that are out there, is that all these new cryptocurrencies are coming to be. There's Litecoin and Ethereum, I think it's called, and Bitcoin, and there's probably 100 of them now. I don't even know what they all are. And in the same way that in the dot-com era, you had all these new tech companies emerging, most of them went bankrupt. Most of them started, there are a lot of really great success stories, but the success stories are just a fraction of the tech companies that actually emerged as a result of that dot-com bubble. And so as people invested into these new technologies and new startups, the story that you hear a lot is of the successes. You don't hear of all the millions that were lost, with people trying to invest into them and trying to figure out which ones were gonna succeed versus which ones were gonna end up dying. And so that kind of ties into that whole survivorship bias thing, where we tend to forget the negative stories and we remember the positive ones. And so right now there's an opportunity to invest in Bitcoin and start transferring your Canadian or US or European or euros into a crypto or digital currency. And I think it's really interesting because it's really easy to get caught up in that frenzy and get worried about whether or not you're going to miss out. And I think that there's some significant risk in all of this. I mean, if the world does flip over to one of these cryptocurrencies, we could watch billions of dollars evaporate overnight in other currencies that no longer have trust, because ultimately paper dollars and coin dollars actually have no intrinsic worth if there's no actual trust in the actual currency. So if all of a sudden humans decide that they're going to trust a cryptocurrency over top of a paper dollar or paper euro, we could see billions of dollars kind of evaporate overnight. And so one of the fundamental rules in investing is that you should only invest in what you know. And one of the things that I've really struggled with over the last decade as I've left my oil and gas job and kind of moved into this regenerative space is even investing at all, because as soon as you send your money out into the stock market, you really don't know where it's going. You don't know what these companies are spending it on. You have no control over it. Basically, all that you really hope for is that you've made a good decision, that it's going to grow in value, and that hopefully they're not going to invest in unethical things. And we don't need to talk about what those unethical things are. I think that you know that. And so as I try and understand how to capture value and make sure that I don't get destroyed financially, with the limited capital that I've got, or the capital that I do have, trying to understand which cryptocurrency to invest in, if any, there's always multiple ways of looking at this. So if you look at some of Nassim Taleb's work, Anti-Fragile, Black Swan, and Fooled by Randomness, you could approach this whole problem in the same way that an options trader approaches it. And I'm definitely not an expert in options trading, but this is probably what Nassim Taleb would, how he would look at it. And so the way that an options trader would look at it is that you make many investments into the currencies or the cryptocurrencies that you think have the highest chance of success. So don't invest in just one, invest in 10 or 100 of them with smaller investments, knowing that the chance that one of them is going out of the 100 or out of the 10, one of them's probably going to succeed and the other 9 or 99 of them are going to fail. And so this is how options work. You're basically hedging your bet on a large basket of opportunity, knowing that most of the bets that you make are going to fail, but one of them is going to increase in value by 100,000 times or something like that. And that's probably a pretty good bet. The one thing that I don't hear many people talking about, though, within the cryptocurrency space is what happens again if a solar flare happens and all of our money is now in this digital ledger that is dependent on these massive server farms running in order to maintain who has money and who doesn't. So that's an interesting thing that I wonder about. I mean, this is where I think it makes sense to potentially own precious metals or actually paper dollars, is that there's still a physicality to these currencies and they're resilient to loss of power or loss of computing power or computer virus, or again, any of these issues that could potentially plague a digital currency. So that's one possible solution is having a basket of these currencies. But the other one that seems a little more interesting to me is that there are things in our economy that will always have intrinsic worth. I wrote a blog about this, which I'll post in the comment section below, and they're essentially enduring assets. So assets that will have value irregardless of what happens in the future. Or at least you could say that the probability that they're going to have value is super high. So things that kind of fall into that class are land, farms, productive farm capacity, IP, intellectual property, knowledge or skills. And so essentially the way to think about this is that if you are worried about how to hedge your financial capital, one of the ways that you could do this is to think about the types of assets or skills or services that you can provide that people will pay for with Bitcoin. So instead of worrying about which cryptocurrency is going to succeed, worry about what people are going to want to purchase with those cryptocurrencies instead. And so this is where I think resilient homes, acreages, and farms kind of ties in. And then some of the skills that we've spent the last decade going and collecting, permaculture, renewable energy, farming, growing food, passive solar greenhouses, low energy building technology, things like that. Because ultimately, these are areas where there's still relatively a small number of people that have that knowledge. And I think based on the research that I've done, that as we move into a lower energy future, as we transition to renewables, as farmland becomes less fertile, as soil erosion continues to increase, as we run out of phosphorus in the next 20 years, we're actually entering into peak phosphorus. There are massive shifts. Water's another one, actually. Sorry, before I continue on. Water scarcity is only increasing. Rainwater harvesting is going to become a common practice as opposed to something that it only happens in certain places because you can't get wells or there's no water on islands or things like that. So as these issues become more acute and people wake up to them, one of the things that you can always rely on is that what's real is rare and what's rare has value. And so if you focus on those rare things, whether it's organic food production or, again, productive farm capacity or any of the other things that we talked about, set yourself up instead to have enduring assets in both physical wealth and also intellectual wealth. And, you'll probably find that you're very well hedged with regards to all of these currencies. It's very alluring to go and invest in these things, and I'm definitely not an investment expert, and you shouldn't necessarily take my advice as solid investment advice necessarily, but these are just the things that I think about. And in terms of how to prepare my family for the future in spite of all of these disruptive technologies, whether it's AI or cryptocurrencies or roboticization. So anyways, I've given this quite a bit of thought, but as always, I'd be really interested to know what your thoughts are and what you're reading about this subject, and how you're managing your own risks with regards to where this whole global conversation around currency is actually going. So leave your comments below, and if you like videos like this, make sure you subscribe. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more about what we do, check us out at vergepermaculture.ca. I'll post those blogs about enduring assets below, and I just really want to thank you guys for taking the time to watch these videos and to create these conversations. I find the comments that you guys leave incredibly rich and also super valuable for my own thinking. So thanks so much. Have a great day, guys.